Hi, I'm JR.
And I'm Iain.
And a few weeks ago, we reviewed The Sword and the Sorcerer, which was the debut film by the director Albert Pune, who later on in his career sort of got more and more into direct-to-video. But that was a feature that came out at the Pictures in the 1980s, and we both thoroughly enjoyed it, despite the fact that it was not, by any stretch of the imagination, what you would call a good film. But it was just a very, very enjoyable film. And at the end of that film, it says Talon, being the lead character, will be back in Tales of an Ancient Empire. And of course, back in the 1980s, when Sword and the Sorcerer came out, there never was a Tales of an Ancient Empire. Pune went on and made other films, including a couple of fairly popular ones, and never came back to the Tales of Talon and told the next story. And so I assumed, that was how it had been left. And then when I introduced you to The Sword and the Sorcerer, lo and behold, when doing the research, opening the wiki page to talk about the movie, we discovered the sequel, Tales of an Ancient Empire, actually had been made 30 years after the fact. So we decided, you decided, because I looked it up and I'd seen that it mostly got 1 out of 10 reviews or 0 out of 5 reviews, and nobody had a good word to say about it. So I was quite happy just to let it ride and not bother with it. But you insisted. And I watched it first, and it was so bad. We recorded an entire podcast that you didn't even know we were going to do because I sprang it on you on the spot. We recorded an episode that was going to be 10 minutes and actually went on for 30, where I tried to persuade you not to watch it because it was so bad. And I gave you a plethora of reasons not to watch it because it was so bad. The worst film probably I've ever seen. Not the director's fault, not the actor's fault. I went into that. I think it was because of money. We talked about this. And if anybody watching this who hasn't, our reviews of Sword and the Sorcerer and Tales of an Ancient Empire, which I think are 2 good episodes actually of the podcast, even if you don't know the films. I think they're definitely worth listening to. Go and find them on our feed. But we did say at the end of the conversation about Tales of an Ancient Empire, you insisted you were going to watch it. And I said, if you did, we should do some kind of an Easter egg where I ask you what you thought of it. And that is what this is now. So, Iain, do you not wish that you hadn't bothered?
I got to tell you, so for all that you made a very good case, and you were not wrong, you didn't lie, you didn't exaggerate. It really was as you described it. I watched the whole thing all the way through. There are films that I have walked out of, so this is not the worst film I've ever seen by definition.
Wow.
What it is a very curious. I don't know if production's the word. I'm given that it was
unproduction, isn't it?
It's an unfinished symphony, isn't it? It's the first half of a movie that was basically released with a bit of lamentable CGI and plot resolution off camera and everything you said.
As I think I kind of suggested, they basically used every bit of material that they'd filmed in order to get it up to 75 minutes, because the start and the end, they just never got to make.
Yeah. Now, why did they release it? And that's not a why, oh why, my God, how dare they? It's seriously, if you're a writer or you're a musician and you've written half of your book or you've recorded 5 songs, you don't put it out as an album yet. With this, if something's dead in the water, then let it go. Who's releasing their kind of sketches?
It is, isn't it? It really is half a movie that's kind of been stretched as much as they possibly can to make you think it's a whole movie. Let me ask you some questions about it. One of the things that we were most looking forward to was seeing Talon back, because he was promised at the end of that first movie, and he does indeed turn up, and his name's all over the credits. And you kind of think the movie's going to be either about him or at least feature him quite heavily in some way. He was the best thing about that first movie, even if he wasn't the best thing about that first movie, right?
Absolutely.
But he was great.
He was.
And so what did you think of him in this?
Well, I sort of, got him confused with someone else, so I didn't recognize him at all. And I assumed that the father of the group of heroes was him, but it wasn't, was it? He was like in a pub for 30 seconds,
Yeah,
chatting
he
up a
just turns
blonde, like
up.
some kind of, yeah. I mean, had he been recognizably the same human being, it might have maybe meant slightly more. It might have been 2 out of 10 rather than 1 out of 10 recognition. But why bother? Why did either of them bother? Whichever one of them forced that contractual obligation for him to appear in the sequel, there was nothing in it for either of them. Why?
And there was certainly nothing in it for the rest of us who were watching.
I think, in fact, that in a nutshell is going to be my review. Just the word "why."
Yeah, fair enough. Now, one of the reason why we've both got blank backgrounds going on our Skype feed for this video is because during the course of this movie, if there's ever anything that needs to be filmed outdoors against scenery rather than against a set that they might have the money to erect indoors, if it's at one of the stages of the production where they've actually got some money, they just do it against photographs. And so there's an awful lot of people standing around against photographs that makes the Phantom Menace, it makes the Phantom Menace look like, I don't know, Raiders of the Lost Ark or something, in terms of the sort of connection between the characters and their surroundings. I mean, what did you think of all that stuff? And while I ask that, there are a few sets at the start in the sort of vampire lair, and they kind of seem to disappear and go nowhere. So I'm assuming the sets were struck before they finished the film.
Yeah, you have to conclude that certain subsequent scenes would have been filmed in other locations, so you can kind of assume if we don't see that place again, then we're not going back there, we're not going back to the taverns. Perhaps it's going to finish in some kind of big sexy castle that they can't afford.
But if they hadn't struck the cave set, they could have gone back to the cave for the climax, but it was struck, so they couldn't.
But
assuming.
But at the time it was struck, they probably thought they had the money to film the big, castle Grayskull or whatever. Some parts of it looked absolutely competent. Other parts of it, like the kind of 12-minute prologue at the start, where they've kind of put an effect over the screen because clearly it was 3 guys in a white studio. Like stylistically, if that was intentional rather than just a something they were forced to do, there's an argument for it. It's not necessarily terrible. It could have been done better, and it could have been made more effective, but it wasn't as bad as some things I've seen.
And yet clearly it's not what they wanted to do, because I mean 12 minutes of it is just there was a point where I was thinking, I know this doesn't go on forever. I know this doesn't go on forever. Please don't go on forever.
So actually, if we strip out that prologue, you're left with about an hour of the 5 heroes who are, and I'm reluctantly going to spoiler this for anyone who's going to go and watch it, they're all siblings. You've got an hour of 5 siblings getting together, in many cases meeting for the first time.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Because they've all got a dead claw around their neck. So that's their thing. They're like, oh, you've got the yeah, no, we must be related. Fine. Oh, great. Let's go and kill this sort of.
How can we be related? Woman. You're really hot.
Yes, and you're clearly in your late 40s, but never mind. So, literally they'd filmed, I want to say 50% of this film. With the trick with the end credits and the trick with the prologue, they managed to bolt on an extra 50% of film to get it long enough to release. But I repeat, why? Had it had the second half that was intended, I think it would have just been a really unspectacular, competent, poorly realized fantasy film that would have been a real stinker. As it is, I think this is a lot more interesting.
But a lot worse. Because there are 2 things about this. One is it wants to be a get the gang together and go on an adventure movie, and it stops at the point at which the gang's together. So there's no adventure in it. It's just an adventure movie with no adventure at all. And the little bit,
it's the first 48 minutes of Rogue One.
yeah, but they don't even get off planet. Well, I mean, yes, and there's a little bit with vampires and that, but actually most of the stuff with the vampires are just standing around looking into the camera and stuff like that. And that's the sort of second point I was going to make. The first one, Sword and the Sorcerer, is so kinetic and so organic and so authentic. This is completely the opposite. It's so stagey, and everything about it feels contrived and affected. It never. The first one is so much fun. You get into it. You get into the groove of it. It's impossible to get into the groove of this. I wonder if some of that is just that, like I say, they've had to use all the material they got. So scenes that should be 2 minutes long are running for 6 or 7 minutes, and it just slows it down and drags it down. And I wonder if that is having the real deadening effect on the sort of pace and tone of the movie.
I mean, I'm assuming it was the same writer for both films.
No, I don't. No, it wasn't.
Because
And
there's a
that's
certain
kind of the
energy and brio in that first film that even though no one's bringing anything remotely original to the table, it's a rattling, rollicking adventure movie. With
Yeah.
this, they're using different but similarly well-embedded tropes, which again, you should be able to construct something fairly kinetic from. But everyone feels like this is the dress rehearsal at the Village Fete.
Mm, mm.
You know.
Yeah, no, the writer's completely different. The first one of the co-writers was Pune himself, and he's not getting a co-writing credit on this. Maybe he could have done with it. Who knows?
If he took his name off because he was a bit embarrassed, you got to wonder.
God knows. It's one of the biggest disappointments in movie history, though, to go from such an entertaining first movie to such an appalling second movie.
It's like RoboCop and RoboCop 2.
No, it's way worse than that, because RoboCop 2, I don't know, I've not seen it since it came out, but it wasn't good, but it was better than this. This is, yeah, but you're right, RoboCop's a classic, isn't it?
Well, you know what? It's like, it reminds me, now I come to actually think about it, of about 10 years after Douglas Adams died, they released A Salmon of Doubt, which was his unfinished 6th Hitchhiker novel. Or possibly it was Dirk Gently. I honestly can't even remember. I want to say it was Hitchhiker, but who knows? And I think there was about 6 or 7 chapters of it. So it was like this. It was a snapshot of the first half of perhaps a pre-penultimate draft of a book. And, you know, for the same reason, this was genuinely interesting to watch maybe because, you know, as a sort of creative person, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, what could it have been? Where would it have gone? It's interesting to look at a work in progress, but sadly, that is all it is. But there won't be any more progress.
Is there anything more to bring up? Or shall we? Well, I've already scored it.
Yeah, so I was disappointed there were no sort of random bits where they walk into a harem full of naked women. So I think it loses more points for that.
In 2010, though, I don't think that was ever really going to happen, was it?
Probably not. No.
I don't know, though. Actually, Dylan and I watched the remake of And Soon the Darkness, and although there's no actual nudity in that, the director is really uncomfortably focusing on the 2 lead actresses' bits for virtually the entire movie. It was quite an uncomfortable experience, even for a sort of red-blooded male. It was very off color.
It's funny how that's become a thing, isn't it? Even if you watch a film you've watched loads of times, and suddenly you've got this kind of really unhealthy objectification going on, and you're recoiling from something that you used to be absolutely.
Well, we did not say what you were absolutely doing, but let's just leave it at that. Right, I scored this 1 out of 10, but we've run out of time, so I'm not going to get a chance to ask you because the budget's gone, and so we're not going to find out what your score was after all. Go on, Iain. Give this a score out of 10.
I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna give it 2.5.
Now we only do whole numbers on this podcast, so
I can't give it a 3. I'm going to give it a 2.
yes. Okay. Tales of an Ancient Empire, then, which might be worth going and taking a look at, but only if you're interested in how not to make a film, or how the making of a film can be torn apart by whatever issues were going on behind the scenes. And we don't know, we're guessing, but we're guessing there were issues behind the scenes. And I think if anybody listening to watching this goes and looks at it, I don't think you can come to any conclusion other than that this movie just never got finished. Right, until we speak again, I was JR.
And I was Iain.
But we will speak again soon.